Prime Minister, I just wanted to kick off with obviously the big issue of the last few days. Growth is obviously your government's primary objective, but in the light of what happened last week with the introduction of tariffs by the United States and predictions of a global recession, are you looking at revisiting your economic plans as a government?
I think what's happened in the last few days, last week or so, is obviously very challenging for us and very challenging around the world. And I'm very disappointed to see tariffs in place. I don't think that they are good for our economy or for economies around the world. And my instinct is that we shouldn't jump in with both feet to retaliate. So in that sense, I'm not changing my plans. I think calm, collected response. Obviously, we have to keep our options on the table and do the preparatory work for retaliation if necessary. But I think that trying to negotiate an arrangement which mitigates the tariffs is better. But I think more fundamentally, in answer to your question, I don't think what's happened in the last few days is a temporary passing phase. I think it's a changing world order. I think the world is changing before us as a new era. And therefore, I do think there are two ways in which our plans don't so much change as turbocharge. The first is we have to do much more and go further and faster in making sure our economy is resilient and thriving.
I have people who work at JLR, albeit at Halewood, that you were at JLR at Solihull yesterday, in the support you gave to the car industry. But I want to talk about steel as well. It's obviously a very, very urgent situation at Scunthorpe. I know you visited, and one of the asks that seems to be coming out is for the government to provide the support, and maybe this fits in what you just described as changing how the state operates, and that support through buying raw materials to keep production going. Is that one of the things that might still be on the table, or other alternatives being looked at? Because clearly it's a very serious situation. I know you're committed to steel. Yeah, well, look, I mean, thank you for raising Scunthorpe. We are in the middle of discussions, so I hope the committee will forgive me if I don't go through each of the fine detail. But I'm absolutely committed to steel production in this country. All of our plans are going to require infrastructure and more steel in this country. So the last thing we want to do is to lose our capacity on steel. That's why we set aside quite a chunk of money, £2.5 billion, on top of the money we put into Port Talbot, which got a better deal there. For Scunthorpe, I've spent some time at Scunthorpe talking to the management, talking to the workforce there, and I know firsthand the impact that any loss of capacity at Scunthorpe would have on the workforce and the community and the country. Therefore, we will keep talking. We have made an offer, but all options are on the table in relation to.
We saw that, unfortunately, there wasn't the deliverance of increased jobs for sick and disabled people. And in fact, we saw an increase in mental health issues and 28,000 sick and disabled people pushed into severe poverty. So how are we going to ensure that in terms of the reforms that are proposed in the Green Paper, that we won't push more sick and disabled people into poverty and further away from the labour market?
Well, I think firstly we need to learn the lessons, as you rightly point out, from the past, where proposals were put into place which in the end didn't achieve the desired end. I don't think that means that nothing can ever work. I don't accept that for a minute. And I'm very struck by the additional number of people that are now not in work. And I do think that the measures we put in place, the right to try work, for example, I genuinely think could make a huge difference. I've seen many examples, you yourself will have as well, of people who would like to take the step into work but are worried that if they do and they fail, then they won't get the work and they won't have the benefit at the end of the exercise. We want this Labour government to reduce child poverty as well, and that's why the strategy on child poverty is so important to us. As soon as we're able to share more details of that with you, we obviously will do so, so we can take your views into account on it.
Final little one, Chair, if that's okay. Well, on that basis, Prime Minister, I absolutely agree with you that we do need to do that work. Will you commit to not implementing legislation before we have the details of those impact assessments? I think that's so important. Otherwise, potentially, we will have policy that won't work and could actually do harm.
Well, as I've said, we need an evidence base, but we also need to get on with the work that we need to get on to. So I'm not going to make commitments in relation to timetabling, but I absolutely take the point you put to me.
Thank you.
Do you have an idea of the timetable for those announcements on child poverty?
Yes, but not sort of to the date.
We have heard a lot of the conversation about tariffs, and you'll know in the past President Trump's approach to our NHS when it came to UK-US trade negotiations. He had his eye firmly on parts of the NHS. Now, you've said publicly that nothing is off the table. Does that include everything to do with the NHS, which includes drug patents, negotiated prices for medicines, and market access for US companies?
Well, I've been very protective of the approach we take to the NHS in any dealings with any other country, because it is our greatest asset and we are not trading it away. And that's the approach that I take here.
Including all the areas I've just mentioned?
Well, including the data that we hold, which is private information. It must be held securely. I do think there's work we can do on what use we make of that data, not so much in trade agreements, but right here in the United Kingdom in terms of advancing our own understanding of medicines and preventative measures. But I take a protective approach when it comes to the NHS.
Thank you. Chair.
Responding to Ms Moran's questions about the Casey review, that you're indicating that there's going to be some announcement or change introduced in 2026 in relation to social care. Did I hear you right?
You did, and I'm just checking my notes because what the timetable we've set is for the report to be in, or for her work to be in two parts. And the first part is 2026, the second is 2028. And it's just double check those.
You seem to indicate that you'd be moving faster on that first part in response to Ms Moran. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Louise is starting her work this month. I've asked her to do her work in two stages. The second of the stages is what are the major reforms that are needed and therefore the cross-party work that needs to be done. The first part is what are the deliverable changes that we can do right here, right now, without waiting for the wider reform. Yeah, right. I'm as sure as I can be, but I can't find the right page of my note, that's 2026. Right. So I'm going to go for 2026. For the first part of the report.
Well,
if I'm wrong about that, I will write to you straight away. But it is to deal with this point, which is a good point, which is let's not just wait till 2028 and get towards an election and find there are problems along the way. Let's bank some of these changes as we go forward. And that's why I split it into two parts, so that we will get part one as a foundational stone to build on.
And also, in the exchange, you were talking about the national insurance contributions, particularly to support care workers, but local authorities and others are not getting enough extra money to pay for those employer national insurance contributions, so it's coming out of their core budget. Are you going to revisit that at all?
Well, as I say, I think the figure, again, it's not quite in front of me, is £880 million extra towards this aspect, which is adequate. I mean, we'll always have a look at what's adequate, but that's precisely why it was put there, and it is much more funding they've had to date.
Yeah, but it's just about making, if each individual care worker needs to have their national insurance paid for, and indeed others, if it's not enough to cover that, then that comes out of core budgets.
Yes, I mean, but it's additional money that's been put in, the work we did at the budget and the decisions we made are the very reason we've able to invest 26 billion extra in the NHS, which is beginning to make a difference. And that's a question of political priorities. And I'm glad that we put the money in the NHS, because I think that's the place it should be.
Well, there's always a trick, not a trick exactly, but government promises something, it makes a change, and then the public sector isn't always funded to cover it. So there's a gap there. I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
You are a lawyer and our Prime Minister, so can you please tell us how the UK will comply with the International Court of Justice's legal opinion on Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine, and can you outline how the UK will implement our legal obligations under the UN General Assembly resolution?
Yeah, look, I mean, was an international lawyer. I think that marks me down, not up. But of course I believe in international law, and I accept it underpins everything we do bilaterally and multilaterally.
So what are we doing to hold countries to account?
Sorry?
What are we doing to hold countries
to
account?
We are members of various courts and institutions, and that is one way of holding countries to account. But we also hold countries to account bilaterally in the discussions that we have at whatever level, whether that's leader to leader, whether that's foreign secretary to foreign secretary. We are critical of Russia as the aggressor in Ukraine because it's in breach of the UN Charter. That is a rules-based system. It is the basis of our criticism. It's the reason that almost all allies across the world, particularly in Europe, are putting in the amount of money they are, because Russia is the aggressor, and it's a rules-based system.
And Israel and the occupation of Palestine?
Well, again, I think the occupation is unlawful. We've said that. That's been long-standing government policy. In fact, in fairness, the last government as well. We are members of the international institutions.
I've spoken to many humanitarian workers around the world who feel that Israel isn't being held to account, particularly when it comes to international humanitarian law. So will we be pushing for an inquiry into the 15 humanitarian workers that were killed on the 23rd?
Oh, I mean, there's got to be an investigation into that. And we have to be absolutely clear that we're not just talking about that isolated incident. There hasn't been enough aid getting into Gaza at speed and at pace for a very long time. The resumption of hostilities is the wrong thing, in my view. We need to get back to a ceasefire. We need to get aid in. We need to get the hostages out. And we need to put our foot in the door for a process, however remote it may seem today, towards a two-state solution, which is, to my view, the only way of guaranteeing peace in the long term. And I do appreciate that may seem a long way off at the moment.
Said these companies are so powerful, the UK needs to treat them as sovereign states. Is that what you are doing, and how is that reflected in trade talks with the US?
Well, they are very powerful companies, many of them based in the US. We are very attractive on AI as well, obviously. We're amongst the top 3 in the world when it comes to AI, with fantastic capability here. And we want to and are working with those sectors wherever they are. In relation to trade talks, obviously, there are questions about the appropriate way to tax digital services, etc. There are questions about how technology impacts with free speech. I've been very clear in my view that we need to have an arrangement for digital tax of some sort. And equally, we need to be pioneers of free speech, which we have been for very many years in this country. But at the same time, we rightly protect, under the Online Safety Act, further provisions of which are coming into force pretty quickly. And when it comes to dealing with paedophiles and protecting children, I take a pretty strong line that we take the necessary measures in order to do so.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Part of the power of these, sovereign companies is their pocketbooks at a time when we are desperately seeking investment. Google's R&D budget is over twice your government's. Microsoft's market cap is 3/4 of our entire GDP. And of the £63 billion announced at the October Investment Summit, which you mentioned, 2/5 of that was from the United States. So isn't it inevitable that British tech policy will be made in Silicon Valley? And how can we ensure that the benefits of investment, growth, jobs, skills, security are fully captured by communities and businesses in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I mean, we set out, you'll no doubt have seen it, the AI Action Plan earlier this year, which sets out how we want to interact with those businesses, with the sector generally. That's been welcomed across the piece in relation to the framework that we put around this. We obviously now need to move that forward. But the investment, in terms of the second part of your question, which is how's it felt in communities here, the investment is investment into this country, into data centres. We've set up growth zones for AI, and I think there's huge potential for us in relation to AI. We already have, as we go into this revolution, which undoubtedly will be, we're not starting in the same place as other countries. We are already right up there at the top in our capability with what we've already got in this country.